Buenos días, vamos a comenzar. Voy a hacer la introducción, como se graba aparte, pues en inglés. Welcome to the Spanish Computer Security 2010. Since 2006, the Technical University of Madrid organizes the Spanish CSD, that we call DISI, DISI in Spanish, the International Day of Information Security. In previous editions, our keynote speakers were Martin Hellman from Stanford University, Radia Perman from Sun Microsystems, and Hugo Krausik from IBM Research. It is a great honor for me to introduce you the keynote speaker at DISI 2010, Professor Taher Elgamal. Just a few words about Taher Elgamal's resumes. Bachelor of Science degree from Cairo University and master's and doctorate degrees in computer science from Stanford University. Chief scientist at Netscape Communications from 1995 to 1998, where he was driving a force behind SSL. He also was the director of engineering at RSA Security Incorporated. Nowadays, Taher is a chief security officer of Axway Incorporated. Dear Taher, I think it is the first time in Madrid. Yes. So welcome to Madrid and welcome to the Technical University of Madrid. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The title of the conference of Dr. Elgamal is eCommerce and Internet Security, the last 15 years and the next 15 years. So now, Professor Elgamal, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My Spanish is not very good, so I have to speak in English, unfortunately. I apologize. It's really great to be in this beautiful city. A city you actually learn about in history and so on. So it's just a beautiful place. I'd like to spend some time talking through the experiences that we had and the advances that we had in applying particular security technologies and procedures and so on. And some of these are sort of personal opinions, actually, about subjects, and some of them are industry issues, and some are sort of predictions of what we believe that the future might actually have for all of us. In short, the reason we're all here to talk about security is this thing called the Internet. And if the Internet did not exist, there would be probably about 5 people in this room instead of that many people. So we did worry about security before the Internet. We worried about security when it related to communications and so on. But the way the Internet connected everything, it actually did change the world. So I'll just spend a little bit of time trying to sort of describe what this new world looks like. Because history always says that if we try to build security without understanding where it applies, we almost always do the wrong thing. If we actually try to build security too early, we also almost always do the wrong thing. So understanding what the boundaries are and what the issues are is very, very important. And then later on, then we decide which technologies we might use. I'm, of course, a technologist myself, but I've been in the industry for quite a long time. And it's really... It's a great experience to actually see things that you learn about and you work on as a technologist actually apply in the real world for people to use and so on. So the Internet really is building a different world. It is completely different now from when we were growing up. And I'm sure this applies in every single country. This is not about where we live anymore. Basically, we're all connected to each other. And if we try to think that we're not connected, then we're going to make the wrong assumptions every single time. The connectivity is a wonderful thing. And if we go back 30 or 40 years, the reason the internet was built was to actually share research results, was actually built for researchers to communicate to each other and try to share advances in particular areas in technology. And all of a sudden, some 15, 16 years ago, a few people woke up one day and say, we're all really connected. This would be a great medium for us to use to do other things. And the other things, it's becoming really, really wild, actually, these days. And I'll try to go through that a little bit. But what we pictured 15 or 16 years ago when the web started was this thing we call eCommerce. The simplest way to describe eCommerce is somebody wanting to buy something. So now I can actually sit in California in my home and buy a product from Spain, and it will actually show up in my door. And it's just all magic, basically. In the old days, I would have to either call someone or travel or do a lot of work. So the connectivity actually has a lot of advantages in this case. It's the cheapest medium that we can find to actually be able to talk to each other, communicate, as well as conduct commerce. So we advanced the e-commerce part of using the internet. And along the way, we did a whole lot of other things that we really, when we built this web early on, never pictured that would be something that we would do. It's kind of funny, I'm still a security technology person. When we sat down at that room, when it was actually 16 years ago, we said, let's imagine that two people actually, one is a buyer and one is a seller, and I want to buy something, and I want to use this network to buy. It would be nice if I know who actually is on the other side of that conversation. It would kind of help. And it would help both sides, right? Because if I'm actually paying something, you want to prove to the other party that you can actually pay. And understanding who that person is and whether they actually own that account that they're paying with is helpful in general. But if you expand beyond e-commerce, if you're actually truly communicating about any kind of business manner, it is almost mandatory that you actually know who's on the other side of the conversation. Otherwise, you're having the wrong conversation. Otherwise, all security things actually don't matter anymore. So we talk about confidentiality and privacy and these issues all the time. But the truth is, it is all dependent on this one little thing, which is, do I know that the right person is talking to me or the right company is talking to me? And the funny thing is, 15 years later, we actually never solved the problem. In spite of the fact that we actually stated that this would be a very important thing. And in spite of the fact that we have not solved the problem correctly, we built an e-commerce ecosystem. There is a whole new worldwide economy that ranges between 300 and 400 billion US dollars. And depends who counts and which countries, and the numbers vary a little bit. But it's a very sizable size economy, and it started from zero in 1995. So actually is an economy that grew faster than anything else that we've seen in human history even. In spite of the fact that one of the pillars that we stated early on has never been solved. So just keep this in mind when we're trying to describe security issues that we have to deal with. As a technologist, basically, when we talk to people about, should I use the internet to do banking? And people say, oh, I'm afraid of doing that because the internet is a scary place, and why should I do that on the internet? So as a technologist, I refuse the argument. There is really no technical reason why the internet should be less secure than anything else that we've used in the past, if we actually build it correctly. And there are things that we need to do it right. If we choose to do it wrong, it's kind of our fault, it turns out. It's not the internet's fault, it's actually our fault. And human nature is rather fascinating. So we will never stop in imagining new things that to use this wonderful internet for. A few years ago, a few friends of mine told me, you got to go to this website called Facebook. It's you get to meet your friends and talk to them and find out what they're doing every day. I said, why the heck do I want to do that? I already call them. I mean, my friends know me, I know them, and I was so wrong. It's the fastest moving thing I've ever seen in my entire life. There's more than, I don't know, 500 million, more than maybe 600 million by now, people who actually belong to Facebook. I have no idea why, actually, still. I actually have an account. I've never done anything with it. And I do not know why this is such a fascinating thing. However, it's actually changing how we talk to each other. My son, who's 24 years old, and he's actually a software engineer, sent me an email with some attachment one time and said, "Dad, I feel so old sending you an email." Seriously, and I'm saying, this is fascinating. I thought that was the new world. So no, I mean, email is part of the old world these days. And then 2 years later, people called me again and said, you got to go to this other site because, if you have news, people can follow you. And if you want to follow some other people's news, you can go do that. And I'm saying, I don't want anybody to follow me, and for sure I'm not following anyone. He said I was wrong again. It's kind of funny. But we're using this internet for very strange things. And it turns out that everything that starts social ends up affecting how we do business, right? So this is about business and how business gets conducted in this new world. So there are signs that this new world that we invented and grew over the last 15 years is different. So if you read the numbers on this new economy, which I think I'm just calling it 350 billion US dollars. If it's above or below, please forgive me because there's no real number here. The truth of the matter is the amount of fraud in that new economy is an order of magnitude higher than the amount of fraud in the physical world economy. So fraud means incorrect transaction. Somebody did a transaction on somebody else's behalf or stole their account or did something or another. So in this new economy, for the 350 billion, about 1.2 to 1.4% of that amount is actually fraud. So there is somewhere in the $3 to $4 billion US dollars of fraud being actually conducted every single year and growing faster than any other sector of any other economy in any country. We survived so far, but imagine, the e-commerce size compared to the regular commerce is like 3, 4, 5%. So it's still a very small percentage of the overall world economy. But just imagine if that number becomes 50% of commerce. And, I'm an internet guy and I'm a security guy. So I like to imagine these things, and I don't see why we shouldn't, because it's a cheaper medium to do almost anything. But if 50% of the world economy is e-commerce, and we keep the rules the same, so instead of 350 billion, it's 3.5 trillion or whatever, the amount of fraud will be $40 billion. That's about the profit of everybody together combined, other than Google by itself, which is really incredible. So we cannot continue to grow this new economy unless we actually start to change things. The amount of loss will be so much that the gangs will basically end up owning the world, which is really not fun. And there is all kinds of different commerce. Originally we thought people will buy and sell. Now there's every single thing, and there is banking services. There is online services for all kinds of different reasons. There is business-to-business transactions. There's all kinds of different interactions between businesses and consumers and so on. So it's actually grew it grew into directions that we did not anticipate early on. And the amount of fraud we should have anticipated because we thought that we would actually solve the authentication problem early on. It's really, really bad that all we do in terms of authenticating now, 98% of it, is by somebody remembering a password. And it's just such a broken system. It's amazing actually it's still around. A little bit of numbers on e-commerce in the world, which actually sort of explains a little bit more. So for every 100 transactions that use the internet, every 100 transactions in e-commerce, 22%, 22 out of every 100 get manually looked at. So for the life of me, I have no idea what that number came from. That means that we moved commerce from the physical world. So instead of going to a store and buying something, I'm sitting at home and typing things and I buy things. So we automated everything. Everything is automated, shipping and payments and everything. And then the payment part, because we never authenticated actually the consumer, we're having to, about a quarter of these transactions, we're having to manually have a person look at it, which is crazy. Because in the middle of a completely automated world, we're adding manual things that actually make no sense whatsoever, because most of these things get approved anyways. They become, good transactions in any case. So there is a lot of strange rules that are still playing in this economy that actually do need to be fixed. And I was fortunate enough to be there in the early days, and I attribute most of this to the fact that we just do not know whether the person presenting that card over the internet is really the right person or not. And the credit card system does not know how to handle e-commerce well yet. So let's switch to security a little bit. So what happened with internet security was kind of fascinating. We never designed any of it. Seriously. Once upon a time, there used to be LANs inside of networks, inside of companies. And we just woke up one day and said, if we connected all of these things together, we will have a really big web. And then we would encourage everybody else to build their own LAN and connect it to the big web also, and we'll be one big happy family, which is a really wonderful thing to think about. So we built this connected set of networks to each other, and then we said, oh my God, now we got the good guys, the bad guys, the confidential information, the not so confidential information, my financial data, your healthcare information is all connected to each other. And certainly it's not a great thing for everybody to see everything else, and it's not a great idea for everybody to be able to change all of that either. So let's try to put some security. And we came up with firewalling and these kinds of things. So we invented a security model after we've connected all of these networks and said, firewalls are going to succeed in protecting networks from the bad stuff going in the internet, and only the good guys would be able to get access to things. What a crazy idea. Of course, firewalls don't do any of that. They're a good suite of technologies, but they actually don't do anything I just said. The reason I'm saying this is it's really important to understand what types of products and what types of technologies actually succeed, because the future is an extension of the past. The future is not an independent thing. I love to go around and see old cities and look at how people lived 100 and 200 and 600 years ago, because we actually live the same way. We have different tools, but we're actually effectively the same type of people. So understanding the past is very, very important. There's another really interesting thing in the security world, which is we're trying to sell security to the large organizations, because large organizations can afford to buy it, which is fine. we're ignoring one very important component, which is the end user. You and I sitting in front of a computer. We don't normally buy security things. Sometimes we're forced to, but we don't normally buy security things. We assume that the banking system has its own security. We assume that healthcare takes over its own data. So the security companies resort to very interesting things. They say, okay, we'll buy one of these and one of these and one of those and put them all together in a package and sell them to the company and say, here is a security solution to all of your stuff, which is completely bogus. It totally does not work, and it does not solve any problem, and these products don't belong to each other. So that's another interesting phenomena that actually occurred over the last few years, because there is way too many little security technologies. The thing that is actually kind of succeeding are things that we call web security products. So the reason web security products are interesting because everything is web these days. You know, way back we used to write software. Nowadays nobody writes software anymore. It's all web software. 100%. There's mobile things. So let's leave mobile on the side for a little bit. But all the non-mobile software is basically web. 100% of it. So it's actually natural for us to think about, so how do we secure these web channels? And some of these ideas are actually reasonable. Simple-minded picture, and the reason I do this because there is another picture I'm going to draw later on. So there's a bunch of networks connected to each other through the internet with edge protection. And edge protection are basically a number of technologies that are circled around this thing that we call firewall. And this is basically what our security model today is. Some of these edge protection things have a lot more web-centric things for the right reasons, which is actually a good thing. But most of them are really firewalls and VPN and that kind of stuff for restricting access somehow. Before we start to think about what the next 15 years may actually bring to us, it's good to understand what happened before and why certain things succeeded. And I think as technologists, we all know that we've seen a lot of good technology that never succeeded. So the best technology does not always make it anywhere in the commercial world, because we forget very simple things that are very, very important when we're deploying technologies. I think every once in a while we actually forget the requirements. So nobody sits down and said, one of the requirements of a web application that both sides are authenticated to each other. And I think we actually wrote that at some point in the past, and we all forgot, and we never did that. We literally forgot, and we forgot because we built up this e-commerce thing, and all kinds of interesting issues came up. Some of them are security issues, some are availability things, some are denial of service, and so on. So we had to go and fix a whole lot of different things, and we really literally forgot. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to continue to move forward without actually solving some of these things. One of the fascinating problems in today's internet is the thing that we call data leakage. So data leakage is something that refers to important information that may be proprietary to a company or may be confidential to a person or to a group or so on and so forth. Or maybe it's a shared secret between the small size of a group. And somehow we find it out on the internet. WikiLeaks is all over the news in 270 countries today. Literally, 270 countries. So what happens there? So we forgot that we connected everything together. We literally did. And we woke up one day and said, oh my God, how did this piece of information find its way on the internet? Let's fix that. And that's one of the worst examples of the security industry trying to fix something. Because we try to build another layer of an infrastructure to fix all what the other layers of infrastructure have tried and not succeeded in doing. And that is not the way to do anything. But it indicates what people buy. And what people buy is very important, because if nobody buys a particular technology, it will not be successful, obviously, because nobody will continue to fund something that people do not use. Another lesson from the past, which is very important, is incremental change. So it's much easier to build incremental advances in anything than to say, I'm going to redesign the entire web security model, and here is a better model. And I can show you 10 different models that are better than what we have today. And none of them will ever be successful, because it requires a lot of change, and a lot of change is just too much for the businesses to take. So while we're improving security of things, it's very important that we advance things in an incremental way so that the world knows how to digest the change. And if you actually don't notice these things, things actually slip by. Security technologies that require the end user to do things are generally not very successful. Because, when I'm on the web and I want to buy shoes, I just want to buy shoes. I do not want to remember a PIN and a password and this and that and the other thing. It's just not in my mind. I have a payment card, whether it's a credit or a debit or something, and I know the site I want to buy from, and this is the end of the conversation. I don't want to do anything else. So if the security technology that will fix the fraud has to interject something in the middle of this interaction and have the user do something different, then we're not going to help e-commerce. So the reason SSL is actually successful, I got so much stories about that, we'll never finish if I start. But the reason it's really successful is because it's hidden from the user. Honestly speaking, people bought SSL early on the premise that it fixes all security problems forever. I have no idea who sold that, but they actually did buy that. We never thought that would be the case, obviously. But the reason it's successful, the reason that we have 350 billion a year is basically is basically due to the fact that we hid SSL completely from the user. These are just examples of things that we use today, which I label things that work. So things that work are not things that technically work. Things that work means things that we use. And it's actually a very important thing to differentiate. Yeah, I love passwords. So I'm going to ignore everything here and just talk about passwords for a while. You can read the rest of the stuff. It's self-explanatory. So password worked in the sense that we all have about 200 of them. I mean, and I do not know how many people here can remember 23 very strong passwords. How many people use the same password for like all 10 things that you do every single day? What a nightmare. So the way these things get broken is there are passwords that go into sites that are really don't offer a whole lot of crazy things that need a lot of security. So they're loose about guarding their passwords. And then use the exact same password to log into your bank. So if I can get your password from here, I get it from there, right? And then there is the phishing thing, which is this is a very strange scientific experiment, actually. You pick an email and say, send it to as many people as you wish, 100,000 people, and say, just send me your password here, please. 10% of the people will actually send their password. For the life of it's always like this. And I do not know why. Why do people write their passwords on random things? I have no idea. So password works, and passwords also did not work in the sense that we actually associate all our accounts with things that we remember. And they're usually things that we told other people about, or they're leaked out in some way or another. So the entire security system is dependent on this thing that we're supposed to remember, and we're supposed to use 23 different, very, very hard to figure out, crack passwords. And, last I checked, the human brain does not have hashing functions inside. If we actually all had automatic hashing functions inside, SHA-3 or something, it would be really wonderful because we can generate passwords like this. We don't have those. We secure things without understanding what is it that we're trying to do, and that's a bad sin. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about what designing security actually means, at least in my experience. But I've seen so many different security presentations started by. This is a new company pitching their new whiz-bang kind of security technology that will fix everything that nobody else did. So they start out saying, now you got your firewalls and you got your VPNs and you have your intrusion detection, therefore you got da-da-da-da-da. I'm really sorry that's the wrong sentence to start with. The second actually I hear this, I walk out of the room because I know that the rest of the conversation is not very helpful. And the reason that is not very helpful is that we're not analyzing what attack or what threat we're actually afraid of. We're just putting technologies over there to do things. And because there's so many security holes, almost anything you put anywhere is going to catch some security problem. But that's not the issue. The issue is how do we focus and how do we put the right priorities on things. So I also list passwords as the thing that did not work for the reasons that I cited. So guess what? So the next 15 years we'll actually see just. Apologies, this thing is falling apart. Okay. We'll see just as much growth in connectivity as the last 15 years did, and I'll describe why. And I think we have to be actually prepared because we already started down that road. I do not know how many people secure their Facebook connections to random people sitting around the globe, for example. I don't even know what that means anymore. So there is modes of communications that change the way we actually talk to each other and do business with each other. Mobile. We started mobile by tiny little phones, and we did texting on the phone. Now, my mobile, I'm sorry, I have 4 different mobile things, and they're all quote-unquote smartphones. And they're kind of smart. They're actually little computers, and I think in a few years, they will be just as powerful as any computer we know. So the size of the device will become a function of the display size. It has nothing to do with the electronics anymore. It's purely a function of the display. So you want a small thing to carry in your pocket, you get a small display. You want to, write a big document, you get a big display. But what's inside is actually going to be exactly the same. So these mobile things are so widespread that there is actually more than an order of magnitude of mobile phones than laptops. We haven't done a lot of business transactions on them because they're still kind of clunky, but that's going to go away and probably pretty soon. And that will actually open the internet to a whole bunch more people that did not do e-commerce. So there is actually promise that because of the growth of the mobile world that we can grow e-commerce even more, and that's actually good because that's highly more profitable business model if you actually think about it. Then the other side is we want to always reduce the cost. So consolidating data centers is becoming an interesting thing. There are something that people call cloud these days, which I actually don't like. The word is kind of strange. But it actually means that we're trying to use our hardware more effectively, and we'll just keep it at that for a while, which is a good idea. So we're pushing our applications to share an infrastructure, right? And it doesn't matter what the data is. The applications are going to use the same infrastructure to do things, to compute things, which actually breaks a lot of security models. At the same time, we're allowing a whole bunch of mobiles to get access to those. Then there's the social networking thing, which of course I'm too old for or something. I don't understand, but there's apparently some billion people that love to do this kind of thing, and that actually changes the business behavior, because it is not just that we're going to use Facebook to talk to our friends across the globe. We are the same people. So the person who talks to their friend over Facebook to just say, hi, how are you doing? Can you have lunch when you're in town? Is also going to use the same Facebook to talk to their business partner on the other side and say, where is the RFP, or answer this question. So there's going to be business communications over this new medium that is not governed by anything. And there's flip side to all of this that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then there's some other things that are really crazy. I mean, why do I want to put an internet connection in my microwave oven? I have no idea. I did not find an application for that yet, but we're actually doing it. So the combination of all of these factors is going to make tomorrow's world so much more connected. The number of different things that will get connected to each other is going to be mind-boggling. These smartphones are kind of interesting. They're not one device. You can connect to people using the cell network. You can connect to them using Wi-Fi. You can connect to servers. There's a whole number of different connectivity features inside of a mobile phone that actually have fundamentally different characteristics. On one hand, security people say, oh, that's good. That means there is multiple channels, so you can share more things. On the other hand, there is more than one way an attacker can actually find their way through, which is really not great. So for the security head, you can actually think about it in two different ways, and both of them are kind of interesting. There's something really interesting. Everybody you talk to in the mobile or the security world these days tells you, oh, mobile phone security is terrible. So the good news is they're right. The bad news is they don't know why they are right. And then companies come up and technologies come up to try to solve security issues in a mobile phone. Because we did antivirus for computers. So people want to do antivirus for mobile phones. What a stupid idea. Because the reason viruses succeed in computers because they're general programming platforms. The phones are very, very different in terms of executing things. So there will be malware on the bad news is there will actually be malware on mobile phones. There is already, but we haven't seen big propagations yet. Something will happen of a large effect that we'll actually notice. But we're not going to be able to solve this by putting some signatures of known things that we can kill viruses with. It's just not going to work because this is a very different world. So trying to solve tomorrow's problem using yesterday's technology is a very dangerous thing, and we should really avoid that. The amount of data that will live on these mobile computers, mobile phones, mobile connectivity things, is probably going to be the same as the amount of data that sits on any laptop today. So all our finances and all the healthcare data and everything that we're talk about afraid of losing is actually going to sit on these mobile devices. And then we're going to complain that the security of the mobile devices is really bad. So challenge number 2 is this cloud thing. So while we're growing the number of devices that we use to get access to things on the internet, we're collapsing the back ends together because we want to reduce the cost. And we're collapsing the back ends by nobody here probably will remember time-sharing machines, but I actually used to use these things. In the old days, we actually used to work with big mainframes, and you had your timeshare. So we're actually getting back to the future, so to speak. So these cloud infrastructures are basically going to run applications from all over the place, and the application will go and rent time on cloud A or cloud B, and it executes and it returns back, and it's not really obvious where things executed. I'm exaggerating a little bit. But if the promise of cloud stands to be true, we just mixed a whole bunch of backends of applications that have very, very different security needs, all in the same backend. And if we don't do that very, very carefully, it is not that we don't know how to encrypt data. We do know how to encrypt data. We know how to separate things. We know how to authenticate. We know how to do all of these things. The problem is the mix of applications with different security modes exposes certain things because it is not clear that the back end, the infrastructure, will understand how to secure every single application without actually being trained to do so. So there is actually an interesting danger that nobody's thinking about. Then there's fantastic new world that I have no idea where it's going to go because, of course, I was wrong all the time here. If you actually stop, if you stop for a second and think for yourself about this social network thing, and if you convince yourself that instead of 500 million, 7 billion people are going to be on social networks somehow, 10 years or 15 years from now, we actually will be doing business deals over the social network thing. So the web will be an underneath infrastructure for yet another thing that sits on top of the web that actually allows people to get access to each other. And they can exchange pricing information, they can exchange discounts, they can sell and buy things, they can do deals of any size. Banks will communicate to each other maybe using similar things. So you're going to get trillion US dollars being sent across these new media. On one hand, there's a great opportunity because it's actually built into our brains, apparently. On the other hand, if we don't do it right, the exposure is too high. So are we really going to connect all our home devices to this internet? I really don't care. There is one very, very interesting thing that is really happening, which is the power grid. So we want to protect our infrastructure from hackers and attacks and so on and foreign things. And the power grid is the number one infrastructure that an attacker would like to actually get a hold of. In essence, we made a big deal years ago when people launched denial of service attacks on Yahoo and eBay and these things. So you lost access to Yahoo for 5 minutes. Big deal. You get Yahoo later on. But if actually the power grid was out for 5 minutes, imagine how much damage that can actually do. But we're actually moving ahead. We're actually connecting all our power grids worldwide, all to each other, all to the internet. It's going to be a wonderful thing. So wars are going to change completely because, you can attack people sitting at home and just typing instead of, launching things. This is serious. This is for real. So we have to be careful. And if you see what the security things that people are putting in these new connected power grids, they're actually not that great, actually, because we're taking things that we've used in the past and have succeeded in very different areas. These are IDC numbers, and how much of IDC numbers you believe, it doesn't really matter. IDC gets paid to produce big numbers, so obviously they will always produce big numbers. But the interesting thing is that this is what they think in 2010. There's about 1 billion mobile internet users. And the mobile internet user here is very, very lightweight. But people connected to each other using mobile stuff. About 1 billion of that. There is 600 and some million laptops. That's a big number too. The smart meters is very small. Right? It's still almost experimental. And then there is servers and other things that connect to each other, right? So in 2020, that's what their prediction is. So the billion mobile will become 2.6 billion, and the smart mobile will be a lot smarter, of course. They don't say that. The number of PCs and laptops is going to get multiplied by 3 or something, so there's about a 2 billion number here. I'm not sure I believe that. But the big jump is the smart meters will go from 20 million to 30 billion, which means that in 10 years, we're going to spread all of these smart meters everywhere in the world. and we're going to connect them all to each other. It's a great idea. And then the RFID tags and all of this stuff. There's trillions of them, of course. And the servers will become all consolidated, right? So you can't count them anymore. 2 trillion financial transactions. That's actually the number I was looking for. In a year, there will be 2 trillion financial transactions conducted over the internet, one way or another. And some financial transactions is somebody buying, something simple for €2, and some of them are trillion-dollar things, actually, literally. And somehow these two things are both labeled financial transactions, but obviously security need is different. I started in cryptography a long time ago. It's kind of crazy, actually, when I think 30 years back. We did not imagine what was going to happen, obviously, to apply these technologies here. So some of the encryption authentication technologies get applied correctly, and unfortunately, some of them get applied extremely incorrectly. Most people think encryption is a magical tool that you stick data through it and it all gets hidden. What a crazy idea. And we actually do not teach ourselves, we do not teach the younger generations what encryption really is. And all encryption does is moves the trickiness from data to keys, right? So if you have a lot of data and you use a key to encrypt it, hiding the key becomes equal to hiding the data. But somehow, the world thinks that encryption is just magic, right? It really isn't magic. And the amount of work that is needed to actually do it right is not trivial. And in some instances, it's worked correctly, and sometimes, people say, this is just a phone connection. I don't need a strong. Who's going to, bother with that? So you put a silly little encryption thing that half works because you think the cell phone just doesn't have enough processor or some reason. And then it gets broken, 2 weeks later. And basically we spent money for nothing because broken encryption doesn't actually do anything. The thing that I probably regret the most is that we missed this authentication piece. And there were opportunities that we could actually have authenticated users correctly over the internet. So people sometimes mistakenly mix authentication with lack of anonymity. So privacy and authentication are really not the same thing. Authentication in a financial transaction means that one party holds this account, I own this account, and the other party holds the item, and we're exchanging the two things, right? So if we prove to each other that this is good, you can actually have a lot of faith in doing this transaction. What happens today is it's just only one half, maybe. So you're kind of depending on the fact that on the average most people are okay, which turns out to be true. On the other hand, until we actually solve this problem, we're not going to get e-commerce to grow the way we want it to grow. We're not going to be able to get these new fancy transactions to happen anymore. Every country I visit, and I travel for a living almost these days, has its own definition of what a digital signature is. It's one of the most fascinating things I've seen. So every country is worked on defining laws and definitions of what a good digital signature is before we ever generate a single digital signature for anything that is useful. So this is an example of governments really need to stay out. Literally stay out, because we're regulating something that we haven't used, and then it's impossible. It's impossible to regulate something that we have not used. We're afraid that somebody's going to force signatures or do strange things, correctly, and we're all afraid of that. But before actually you put it into real use, before there is a digital document that I sign in the US and somebody in Spain can read it and say, okay, this signature is good, there is really no reason to have any laws whatsoever, because the laws are guarding the wrong things. So we actually stopped the propagation of a very, very useful technology because governments got in the way. All of them, actually. All governments are guilty. It's kind of interesting. And I do not know why digital signature is the thing that attracted governments. I really have no idea. But the promise of a digital signature to the new world is huge, because you can actually have an entire workflow that is cryptographically proven, that every step has been done correctly. And then later on, people are going to find their way through it, they're going to break through it, and thieves are going to steal money. But thieves steal money in any case. So trying to stop that ahead of time doesn't actually do any good. So unfortunately, I do not know how to solve this problem anymore, because the definition of a signature in every country is different, even inside the EU, which is a fascinating thing. Belgium has its own definition, and every other country has its own definition, and all I want is to actually sign a little thing so that the person on the other side say, yeah, it's you. These legal definitions of things are just crazy. So let me jump into what I think security actually means in this big world. So there is multiple things that we need to secure. The infrastructure is basically networking. So when you think of a firewall is a device that secures the infrastructure in the sense that it prevents information coming across the wrong port, the wrong TCP port, to actually get into your network, which is a good feature. And people try to put application things there and stuff, but it actually doesn't. It's very hard to make work correctly. So a firewall is really an infrastructure protection kind of device. And it doesn't work in today's world because it's very hard to separate networks anymore. We're really, really literally connected. My cell phone is at the same time connected to multiple things. So which firewall is it under at this point in time? I have no idea, right? So I think the right way to actually secure the infrastructure is to distribute the protection. It turns out that the best way to find solutions is to ask the right questions. So I'm asking questions here. These are not solutions, by the way. So instead of trying to fictitiously say this is the boundary between my network and the internet, let's add little protection things along the path between things. And I think that's the best way to stop malware from propagating. That's the best way to prevent things like denial of service attacks. And I'm saying this because the weight of each one of these attacks is completely different depending on which application we're actually thinking of. Right? Remember that the power grid, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So distributed security is really the way to solve the infrastructure security. Every router that has ever been built knows how to authenticate its sender. So if I get a TCP packet from the router across from me, I'm a router, I actually technically have the ability to ask that router whether he is the right router that sent me that thing or not. So you're authenticating router to router across the path of packets. There is not a single router on the internet that implements that feature. And we're doing that because of performance, right? So we actually preferred performance over security. And it turns out that when we did that, we allowed everything to go very fast, including viruses, of course, because it's just a bunch of bytes. So now a router is basically a dumb little thing that gets a bunch of bytes and routes them to the next guy and doesn't even think about, did I even get these bytes from the right place that claims to send me or not? So that allows people to change IP addresses and forge things and do all kinds of different security problems that we can solve with a tiny little configuration actually in routers, believe it or not. It actually does exist. Now, so if you take that and expand it a little bit and allow routers to guess, and don't spend too much time, just guess whether some of these things look like malware or not, and allow these points in the infrastructure to talk to each other and collaborate, you're actually going to end up with a system that is a grassroots built, that the entire infrastructure is actually helping itself remove these malware things. And then the good data will actually end up going to the right place, probably just as quickly, maybe a little bit less quick. So I'd love to see the network security controls distributed over the internet, not between networks. Between networks is actually way too late, effectively. And you can't test every single thing, so stuff goes through. And you know, today we have these targeted attacks that are not even, you cannot even build a signature for. So you have to build a smarter infrastructure. The fabric needs to be smarter to be able to guess, is this really somebody trying to attack this, or this is a real transaction? Then there's applications. Something very, very strange happened some 10, 15 years ago. We told ourselves that, you know, applications should be really dumb. We're going to build all the security down in the infrastructures so that application guys can write applications by the pound, which was a really bad idea. Because just think of encryption for 1 second. The infrastructure has no notion of what's important in terms of information or what's unimportant. It's just all bytes to the infrastructure. TCP doesn't know anything. But if you're actually writing an application, whether you're talking to a file system or talking to a database or talking to any structured forms or something like this, you can actually tell which part is important, which part is not. You can decide to encrypt particular things. You can sign particular things because the application understands the context of what everything is. So that discipline is gone from our system, and we have to bring it back. And we have to bring it back because there will never be an infrastructure that is cost-effective, that can secure all applications that do all kinds of different things, without spending 10 times as much money. Basically, the application is a lot closer to what the data is. So I claim, in spite of the fact that I actually worked on SSL before, but I claim that the right place to do encryption and signatures is inside the application logic itself. And you can decide to encrypt data forever. You can decide to encrypt it just when it's traveling, depending on what the requirements is and what the threats are that you're trying to deal with. And I believe as the internet continues to grow, that we're going to be working on different style applications that have fundamentally different threat models. And I'll try to touch on what a threat model just in a little bit. But you want to secure things really differently depending on what is it that you're trying to achieve. Right? Then, another thing we forgot. So way back when we started computers and networking, there was something called information security. So inside of these old organizations, you would find a group called InfoSec, Information Security. And it's important because it's the information that actually matters. If you're a bank, if you're a healthcare provider, if you're a merchant or anything else, it's certain types of information that you really care about the most. And we end up securing this entire infrastructure because we really have no idea what to do here. It's really crazy. So we bought firewalls and this and that and the other thing for the purpose of securing the information itself. And we forgot to secure the information in the sense that if somebody actually penetrates inside your firewall, the information is all available. There is no second layers of access control. So that does have to change because we're not going to be able to encrypt every single thing in the universe because there is no reason to. So we have to be able to choose. And we cannot choose until we actually know what that is. And we have to sort of apply the right identities and the right roles and the right directories, use all of these technologies to actually secure the information correctly. And then there is a little bit of a dream that I'll talk about in a little bit. I'm writing things here that just get us to think together, basically. So sometimes it is not that the data is confidential and I don't want other people to see it. It is, and I applied direct encryption and life is very good. But I succeeded because how the internet is built. I succeeded in making one particular connection delayed by 30 minutes. And the internet, actually, that is quite possible because the way we decide on routes and so on, it's kind of all over the place. So if you picked one of these transactions that is a bank-to-bank transaction, and you actually wanted to affect some economy, you would focus on these bank-to-bank transactions and delay them. And that's all you do. You didn't change anything. You didn't even know what was in it. But you know where is it coming from and where is it going to, and you delayed it. The amount of money that will get lost in that economy is mind-boggling because the timing of things actually affects the financial industry so much. The fact that a particular piece of an infrastructure is not available for something to be delivered into a financial institution can actually kill economies. So these are different kinds of attacks. These are not the things that we think about as security issues, but they actually may be more important. It may not bother me that somebody knows that a bank sent $100 billion to the other bank. Who cares? They do that anyways. What actually is important is that who gets the float on these 30-minute things, and that actually matters quite a bit, especially if it's across country boundaries. So from a financial industry, there's applications that you really care about a lot, more than the data itself. Actually, it's counterintuitive, but it's correct. In the healthcare world, the data is actually what matters the most. But the timing also matters. So we always talk about, if we put all our healthcare data online, people will be able to penetrate and find out, stuff, private things about our health life, which is a very interesting threat and we should think about. But I don't hear anybody talking about, so what happens if the information is not available to a hospital when somebody shows up in an emergency room? That is actually a security threat. It is not security in the confidentiality standpoint. It's unavailable. A denial of service, so to speak. So if somebody mounts a denial of service attack on an emergency room so the information cannot get to it, lives will basically be lost, because if you don't know who these people are or what kind of diseases, what kind of health issues they got. So the information is very, very important when you're thinking of healthcare, but we have to expand sort of our minds a little bit about what security issues we need to think of. This is my favorite subject of the week because I just talked to a couple of energy companies in the United States right before I came over. So the information that will be shared between these power grids and the rest of the internet have in them, person so-and-so used X watts for the last month. So that may be actually private information, but honestly, I really can care less if somebody figures that out about me or not. What you really, really care about here is the infrastructure. So the information here is not really important. What it really is important here is the infrastructure. So when you're thinking of, what do I need to secure, before you do that, we need to understand what is it that we're using the infrastructure to actually achieve. Because if the infrastructure cannot deliver the information across the internet between these power grid points, bad things will actually happen. If that's intentional, you could literally mount wars that way. We don't teach security correctly in general, and I label that just across the globe, actually. And I think the time has come that we actually think of security in a different way. So if I ran a security consulting company as part of my prior lives. I did a bunch of different things. And when you hire a security consultant and ask them, come and analyze the security of my network or my business or whatever you want, before you can actually do that, you have to sit down and ask them, so what do you do? What do you want to protect? What kind of interactions between inside and outside? What matters and what doesn't matter? That is called a threat model. So the threat model is, what can people do? What things that you care about that people can do to affect your business or your organization or whatever. And we don't teach this stuff, and it's actually easy to teach, and it will actually fix a lot of things if we do that right. Just like any other project that any of us have been involved with in the past, you are never able to do 100% of a project, right? I think I'm right. You're always like either 20% or 80% or something. So if you don't know what the priority of the items that you want to do, you're going to end up choosing the wrong things. And the same thing applies in security. So you say, I'm going to do a bunch of security things, but I'm just not going to authenticate users because it's too hard. So you just picked one of the most important things that you actually had to do and decided not to do it because it was too hard, and did a whole bunch of other things after the fact that just to recover from that one issue. And that happens actually in a lot of different situations. When at the end of the day, whether we're building a technology to secure things or an application that delivers secure features or an infrastructure that talks to people through, the internet, adding security is basically a bunch of tasks that somebody needs to do according to the importance of the priority. And we just don't teach security like this, unfortunately. There is actually philosophies in what a threat model is, and I just picked the simple thing. So imported information, there is basically two things that an attacker can do. One is look at the information. So I just found out that President X told their army to go attack this other country. That's actually a bad piece of information to leak out. What would be worse if you actually change what's in it and say, go attack this country now, and the president never said that. So we think of confidentiality as the top security problem, while integrity is actually the top security problem by far. So integrity means that the data needs to stay the same. If somebody succeeds in finding that out and writes in the WikiLeaks that I found this out, it's a really bad piece of news. But if I could have changed it on the fly and allowed somebody to go do something bad somewhere else in some other country, that's a horrific thing. So again, priorities are very important, right? So this is about information. Then there is the people issues. So identity theft is kind of starting to become an issue on the internet. It is not quite mainstream yet, but it could be. Any kind of spoofing. If I succeed in making a transaction and make myself look like somebody else, I did something wrong. And if we're analyzing an infrastructure or an application, that's something that is very, very important most of the time to actually work through. If it's the power grid, maybe yes, maybe no, right? Whoever invented the super user, I just, Unix people are nuts. So there is a notion of a user that can do anything on a machine. That is a bad idea. Now, there should be a user with the privilege to do certain things, like, a patch kernel stuff, which is a perfectly good thing to do. And there should be probably a different user that should be doing the database manipulation, because if you give somebody access to all the data and all the machines at the same time, the probability of something bad happening is extremely high, not because that person is bad, but because this credential may be lost. And if you actually track the really, really bad security issues that happened over the last 10 years, 90% of them were like this, where basically a piece of malware succeeded in penetrating somebody's machine and stole a super user password from someplace. Because guess what? Sysadmins are people. They're not robots. So they also don't have hashing functions in their heads. So their passwords are passwords. And if all you need is one of them, and you don't care which one. So you're not actually attacking a particular sysadmin. I just want to find some kind of super user account someplace in this network. And if you find that, you're home free. You can do almost anything you wish. That's a really bad security model. I think operating system people need to wake up one day, but that's a really terrible thing. And then I list denial of service attacks because it is really important in particular cases to make services available when they're supposed to be available. And I think I mentioned a couple of interesting cases before. And then a lot of times, so I ran this wonderful security consulting company, and you walk inside and you're talking to the CIO and the chief security officer, and they start out saying, "Oh, we trust all our people." Well, good. Why do you hire me then? So of course we trust our people. I mean, we're not going to hire people and not trust them. But stolen passwords, stolen credentials have nothing really to do with who's trusting whom. The insider attack does not necessarily mean that a person inside the company, an employee that has an Active Directory entry, is actually attacking their own network. It's most of the time a piece of malware that stole that credential. So it actually looks like an insider attack in the sense that there is no broken window. But somebody came in and stole something and left, and it was through super user access or whatever user access. And you can't find a signature for anything because there is nobody actually did an attack from the outside. They just find their way inside. And I'm claiming here we're not going to be able to have a single security model that actually solves all of these problems all at the same time. It is really not possible because it will be so expensive we're just going to give up on something. Again, some of these things are dreams of mine, so I apologize. But if the important things were smart enough and knew how to defend themselves, life would be much, much better. If data was actually smart, and it's not really such a crazy idea. Data being smart means that the data knows who's authorized to see it. Right? So if you can build the authorization rights inside of files or database fields, we would actually be having a completely different conversation right now. Because the protecting from the outside becomes less important. The important information can guard itself. So the amount of money we spend on trying to guess and this and that and the other thing and signatures, we still care about these things, but all of a sudden the data knows how to protect itself. It's a very important thing. Browsers are just magnificent. I worked in a browser company at some point in the past, and just try to imagine being the security guy in a browser company. That was not fun. So we built a lot of good security things, and we broke them all in the browser. So if you're building a web application and you're trying to give somebody access into something to do any kind of business transaction, you better do all the security checks at the back end, because the browser thing does not know how to do any security checks. Because the trust model is basically open. You can convince anything about anything, right? And people make that mistakes 9 out of 10 times. I challenge you. And I've looked at a lot of source code for a lot of different applications. If you don't check the authorization rights or the privileges at the back end, it is guaranteed to be wrong. So instead of the old picture that we had networks connected to each other, I want to actually look at the internet in a different way. It's a bunch of applications connected to each other. And the applications, some of them are financial transactions in nature, some of them are information lookups, which is healthcare is one. Some of them are just connectivity things like the power grids. And if you actually classify these applications, and I'm being loose a little bit, but it's okay, you can actually guard each type of application with a particular type of defense. And then the connectivity actually works out. And the investment also kind of works out because you're investing just about enough in each class of an application. Now, we're not protecting anything 100%, by the way. But we never will protect anything 100% anyway, so there is no reason to try. And just prevent the most important things from happening in each class of an application. So this is an application-connected network rather than networks or machines or devices, right? It's actually really important to think of it that way. You know, the hackers are the most connected group in the universe. And I don't know how many of you looked at these people. How many hackers are in the audience here? I better not say bad things here. I never know. But hackers talk to each other all the time. Across country boundaries, they cooperate a lot. And they benefit from each other's experiences. And somehow the normal businesses, quote-unquote normal business, do not do that. So if I'm running a bank, I would never tell the other bank that I had a breach because it's bad to me. And you forget that if you tell the other bank that you had a breach and it looked like this, protect yourself, you're going to get it back the next time. We just do not do that. We started to kind of share certain things, but the amount of collaboration between hackers is so much more. And I think that there will not be a way to protect the real businesses from these hacking things until actually the cooperation comes up. This list actually is much, much longer than that, but I had to put it on one slide. So there's a number of open research things, and I throw the slide. Everybody asked me to speak at the university because sometimes people think that security has been solved. I swear, I heard that before many times. So there's a long list of things in every single aspect of network communication and information security that actually has not been solved. That's the center of all of this, is make things smarter, not dumber. We listen to the networking guys too much, and I fight with the networking guys every single time I go to conferences because they're actually the reason networks were built intentionally to allow hacks, actually, if you can believe that. It's kind of true. So the security industry has actually changed that, and we have to build smart things. Smart things don't have to be slow, by the way. They could be smart and very quick, in the sense that you don't have to determine in every single point in the system that a complete attack is happening. But if you can determine certain things and communicate across, you can actually determine that there is something bigger happening and be able to react before it actually hits an important asset. I'm happy to talk about this to anybody who'd like, but I think I'm going to run out of time soon. This is my favorite slide. Because when you predict the future, if you're right, you're a hero. If you're wrong, nobody actually cares. There is no downside to predicting the future. It's a beautiful thing. So here I am. The internet will change the world yet again. And then we can meet again 15 years from now, probably on a beach and not in the winter. Because I'll probably be retired at that point in time. But life will have changed just as much in the next 15 years as it has in the last 15 years. We sometimes forget that this is such a young industry. We think we know all that happens, right? And we don't know much. It's an extremely young industry. I mean, it took the auto industry, 50 years to figure out that a seatbelt is a good idea, right? And then, we're just 15 years into this and we're figuring stuff out. I think we'll still be talking, unfortunately for me, we'll still be talking about attacks and hackers and whatever the next wave of things is going to look like. Because the industry never actually stops and thinks. The industry always moves forward, so you can only do incremental advances. So I hope we do the right incremental advances for sure. And people talk about cyber terrorism a lot. I do not like the word cyber terrorism. I think cyber war may actually happen though, because when everything is connected to everybody is basically at the border of every other country. I mean, if you think of war as something between countries, you're not going to fight the country next to you anymore. It's beautiful. I don't know why North Korea actually hacks South Korea, for God's sake, other than they hate each other. I mean, they can hack anybody, right? So there's something really weird here that will allow people to do things that could be damaging just because they thought to do so. Yeah, I mean, it is important to remember that this is a young industry. We're just learning things. There are some things that we really ought to go do and improve, and there are some things that will probably take a while. I think thinking of applications and as independent entities probably will benefit us a lot because there's different features of all of these things that we're putting on the same internet that we actually need to understand and deal with in different ways. There's something I mention here that we also usually forget to tell ourselves and our business colleagues. Security is not a technology and it's not a solution. It's actually a process. It's not an end game. It's a journey. And if you don't think of it as a journey, and in a journey, you actually go to different places. You take the train and you stop at different cities and you look at different things. So it is actually, it's not which city you got to, it's actually the journey that matters. And as long as things are improving as you go on, then security is getting better. The majority of business people in particular think of security as a problem that needs a solution. And that is actually a wrong thing. It's a business process. This is a true comment. Ken Olsen is a very smart guy. In 1977, he said, "I really have no idea why people would want computers in their homes." So he was more wrong than I am. Thank God. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taher.
Do I take a question or what do I do? I sit here. Okay. I'll bring my water.
Thank you very much, Taher, for this interesting talk about e-commerce and security internet. Perhaps something is changing into the internet security, or maybe we are expecting some changes.
We hope.
We hope. Whether we have more or less 10 minutes to questions. Please, person who want to ask something, stand up and speak in English, please. I'm not a translator. Questions?
Oh, wow.
Nobody? I can't believe it. No questions?
There's something in the back there.
Okay. Thanks.
Good morning. Good morning. Professor, you use a very interesting example with the healthcare system network to make a point that sometimes availability is more important than privacy. I am not sure if you are aware that here in Europe, sometimes privacy it's more important than security. Right now, we are dealing with a lot of issues regarding IP address, identification of devices. I think that European authorities right now are blocking a lot of fraud detection systems just because they think they handle too much personal information, personal data. So, given your example, the healthcare network, and I am sure that sometimes some availability is more important than privacy. From your point of view, and for the next 15 years for e-commerce, do you think that security would be more important than privacy?
So, by security, you mean confidential? What do you mean by security is more important? Confidentiality?
I mean confidentiality, I mean secure transactions, I mean that my money is going to the seller and not for other persons.
Right.
That's security.
Yeah, I don't think we should put a ranking on what is more important, privacy or security in general, because it depends on the circumstance. Preventing somebody from seeing that you've done a transaction, which is confidentiality, may be important. Making sure nobody can change the transaction probably is more important. Making sure there is enough evidence that the transaction has actually happened so neither of the parties can get out of it is probably more important. You know, when I think of these things, privacy becomes one of these items. Has private information leaked out without any reason, for example? Because, you know, information that is not to be shared is completely unimportant. So we call it private information because you do want to share it in the particular time that you actually care about. So it's a matter of which application, and I think countries are still wrong in this particular area because we're labeling privacy in general without actually thinking of what the circumstance is. And you know, governments are in the business of protecting citizens, so I'm not against that in general. But when it comes to, you know, technology advances, I think the laws are just kind of wrong, unfortunately. And I'm not against protecting privacy. I'm actually a crypto person, right? So I actually like to protect things more than most people. But if we don't understand what is it that we need to achieve, there's no way we're going to do it right. So trying to, you know, it's like trying to build a law on digital signatures. It's just exactly the same thing. So a law on privacy without understanding, you know, which data and where is it going and what you're doing with it, and how exactly is somebody who's actually hurt in an accident going to be able to give authorization to a doctor to see their medical record? I have no idea. You know, there is a lot of interesting things that we have to think about before we do this, but I don't think there is a ranking in general. In some cases, privacy is actually more important. But
okay, another question? Yes, here. Please.
Down here.
Down here.
Good morning. I have two questions. One general and one more specific. The specific one is, I think that you belonged to the team that developed, specified and developed the SCT protocol, Secure Electronic Commerce, okay, for banking. My question is about, what about the story? This protocol, to my knowledge, hasn't been tampered, okay? Sí, más cerca. Okay. Did you understand my question?
I do.
Okay.
Only too well. Yes.
So, the protocol, up to my knowledge, hasn't been tampered. Okay, but anyway, banking institutions haven't supported this protocol to the end, to the practical development. Okay, deployment. So, what are your feelings having specified this protocol and being that this protocol has not been into success, okay? And the general question is about electronic certificates. Do you foresee a market into security for electronic certificates in the future? Thank you.
So yeah, SCT is an example of an overkill. It was actually put together as a protocol to protect a lot of different types of financial transactions. But if you actually see what happens on the web, which is really what it was designed to do, the vast majority of web transactions are less than 50 euros. So trying to do all of this infrastructure and get certificates to merchants and to people and CAs and sub-CAs and all of this is an overkill of a solution to a problem that did not need all of that. Now, it's a really good solution if the value of the transaction is very high. But the number of very high value transactions on the internet is very, very small, and people usually don't use just regular protocols to do it. They put it inside of an application of some type, so you actually have an opportunity to secure it somewhere else. Unfortunately, we kind of knew that. We actually, sometime during the SAT development cycle, it was becoming obvious that the protocol is becoming too big. It's just too many different pieces. It touches a lot of different things. So in order to actually promote SAT in the industry, you had to change the entire ecosystem, which is extremely expensive at the same time. So thinking of a rollout did not happen through this process, unfortunately. It was basically a number of people from different credit card companies, a number of scientists from a number of different companies, all put in the same room. And there was very little attention paid to how are we going to deploy this to 3 million merchants and 50,000 banks worldwide, right? This is the internet. And I don't know how many 500 million different users were buying and selling things. So it failed because there was no rollout plan. It's just a beautifully designed thing that, you're right, technologically it's never been broken, and I don't think it will be. But it's just very expensive to implement because it doesn't really fix. I mean, it over-fixes something. Over-investing never works right. Now, you're asking me about digital certificates, and I started in this business 30 years ago. So, of course, you know what my answer is going to be. So for better or for worse, I think digital signatures, which is the #1 application for certificates, is a great application. It's going to actually save a lot of money. It will improve a lot of processes worldwide. And, public key is kind of the only way I know how to do it right. Now, does it have to be a digital certificate signed by and approved this and that and the other thing? I think we overdid that too. So there's other ways that you can agree on public keys and things like this depending on what the application is. You don't have to have a universal trust model to sign something. So can you have a business in digital certificates is a very difficult question to answer. But I see a lot of applications for public key. And what the infrastructure part is, it will be what we think of PKI. At some points in time, it will be something different some other points in time. There's other forms of public key that does not need an explicit digital certificate, actually. There are implicit certificates, and there's all kinds of different things. Depending on what the application is, you can actually deploy different things, right?
Okay, we have no more time. Just a little bit question. One more. Just one more. Yes. Here. Well, two, but a little bit. Microphone, please.
Down here.
Where's the microphone?
I don't know.
It's missing. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Do you think that usability is probably a threat that we have to consider against security?
Usability?
Yeah, usability.
Of?
Against security.
Against security.
Against security.
I mean, nowadays we have many different people working in the information society.
Mm-hmm.
Applications tend to be as usable as possible, and apparently, well, it seems that the big threats or the big problems are coming from people that are maybe not really aware of what are they doing, or maybe using an interface that it's not secure enough.
So yeah, so I actually, so what I meant to mention in one of these slides in the middle of the presentation is the most successful security technologies are the ones that the user can't see. So the infrastructure need to get secured in a way that protects the users from their own, sin, so to speak, right? Most users are not going to be able to remember things. So instead of saying that the user forgot and sent the wrong file to the wrong place, the infrastructure is actually a better place to determine that. So you can have an infrastructure that understands that this kind of file is not supposed to go there, and ask the user, did you really mean to do this, or whatever. So I think making the infrastructure smart actually eases that off. We will not be able to propagate security technologies that make people's life hard. It's been proven more and more times than I care to count. I worked on secure email for about 30 years, and I still have not sent a single secure email message other than to my friends to play with the technology. So that's a great example of a great idea with all of us can relate to, and not being implemented right.
Maybe the call or yesterday.
Excuse me. Yes, Toledo was called. Yes. So yes, I think part of the experience learned from the past is let's design security in a way that does not impact people. You're absolutely correct. Usability always wins. There's no question. Because if you don't use it, who cares? It doesn't matter whether it's secure or not, right?
Okay, just one more, the last one, please. The microphone in the middle of the room.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your present first. I would like to know, in your opinion, what is the paper that perhaps will play the quantum computing and quantum cryptography in the future in these 15 next years? Thank you.
Typical question.
The only reason I never put that in a slide is it's always a question at the end, so there is no reason to put it in a slide. So these are multiple questions phrased in a single question. So there is a lot of research on quantum computing in a lot of different places. My friends at Xerox PARC, which is one of the places that do that, say that within 15 years, if government funding stays, which is an if, we would probably see a quantum computer out in a commercial, I mean, they're not going to be cheap, but in a commercial state that you can actually run an optical computer and do computations in a fundamentally different way. So there is reason to believe that there is advances in that science that will actually bring a commercially viable product within 15 years. And that's not really it's not my area in particular, but that stands to be true. That's what people say. Now, will quantum computers break all cryptography, which is another question that people ask all the time. And then the answer is actually no. There are actually known, even public key techniques that quantum computers cannot break. It will change the way we think about things. So factorization of integers or discrete logarithms may be easy at that point in time. But certain other things will not be easy. So it will change what methods we use, perhaps. But it will not change the entire equation to a point where we cannot have secrets anymore. right? Nothing is really ultimate. And you know, we can chat about that if you'd like. But certain crypto methods will not be viable if quantum computing is really available everywhere. And certain others will be very viable and will probably get used, so such is life. Now, there is the topic of quantum cryptography, which is a whole other different thing. And I don't know whether that was part of your question or not, but that's usually how I answer this particular kind of question. So there are actually implementations of quantum cryptography modules, optical cryptography keys. I don't think these are useful unless a lot of computing actually converts into optics, and that is not going to happen in my lifetime. So it's hard for me. That is very difficult for me to predict. So quantum cryptography is interesting. You can share keys very quickly. You can encrypt things over a fiber, you know, in a very secure way, and so on. But that is such a limited application. I don't actually think of it as interesting yet. Right? I'm thinking of cryptography as something that protects the data in a sustained way, not just in communicating something over a fiber. So the application is very limited. I hope I answered.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thanks so much, Taher.
Thank you.